Hot June sun beat down on Route 51 as Elvis Presley, dressed in a simple white tee and worn jeans, stepped from his Cadillac into the dusty parking lot of Marlowe's Diner. No entourage, no flashing cameras. Just him, hair still damp from a late-night studio session, seeking nothing more than a strong cup of coffee. At that very moment, a roar of motorcycles sliced through the air. A pack of leather-clad bikers rumbled past, laughter and jeers tumbling from their leader's lips. He was a hulking figure, oil-stained vest straining across broad shoulders, swaggering toward the diner's entrance. Inside, Elvis turned at the sound of the door's clang. The room's tension snapped into focus as the biker barked at the waitress. "Coffee! Black! Like a real man's!" He didn't see the framed photo of the king on her wall. He didn't notice the quiet man at the counter until, with a single, offhand remark, "You call that strength, brother?" He sparked a confrontation no one in that room would ever forget. Elvis eased into the corner booth of Millie's Cafe just after noon, the bell above the door tinkling as he stepped inside. The July sun had turned the highway asphalt into a dull, shimmering mirror, and dust motes drifted in through the open windows. He unfolded himself from his worn denim jacket, left unbuttoned for comfort, and brushed a hand through his hair, revealing the faint sheen of perspiration. He'd promised Lisa Marie he'd be quick. Coffee black, 2 sugar, and a slice of pecan pie he knew she favored. Across the room, the lone barista, a bespectacled youth named Ronnie, busied himself behind the counter. He glanced up, recognized the face behind the dark glasses, then looked away and pretended not to see. The other patrons, truckers and travelers in dusty boots, kept their heads low, as though sharing space with fame made them uneasy. That uneasy calm shattered when a group of bikers thundered through the doors. The leather-clad quartet strode in, helmets in hand, boots scuffing the linoleum. At their head was Mick Crusher Malone, broad-shouldered, bristling with tattoos, and wearing a grin that spelled trouble. He barked a greeting to no one in particular and rapped the laminated menu against his palm. Elvis sipped his coffee slowly, settling into the steam and the hum of conversation. He never turned to watch the newcomers. He didn't have to. Crusher stomped to the counter, slapping a heavy hand against the formica. "Whiskey," he demanded. Then, hearing the soft murmur of Elvis's voice as he spoke into the small payphone near the washroom, Mick spun on his heel and saw the king of rock himself. "Hey!" he shouted, voice ricocheting off the tin ceiling. "Ain't you that old rocker boy? Ain't you past your prime?" Heads whipped around. Elvis ended his call, tucking the receiver back into its cradle. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Mick swaggered toward the booth. Each step crackled with the tension of a challenge issued. The other bikers followed, laughter trailing behind them like a bad omen. "You think you're some kind of legend?" Mick jeered, leaning over the table so close that Mick's leather cuff almost brushed Elvis's coffee cup. "Last I heard, your records were dying like old dogs. No place for your kind of noise these days." Only the hiss of the ceiling fan and the drip of the coffee machine answered. Then, quieter, softer, the voice of a child. Lisa Marie, tucked behind him, clutched his belt loop, wide-eyed. Mick's grin widened. He reached out, spurred by cruel impulse, and patted the girl's head. His gauntlet was heavy, hard, unfamiliar to her gentle curls. "What's he teaching you, princess? How to sing to ghosts?" The cafe fell into a shuddering silence. Truckers froze, fork poised halfway to their mouths. Ronnie's knuckles whitened on the countertop. Even the regulars, hardened and cynical, looked away, unable to watch a child made frightened for sport. Elvis leaned forward. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "That's my daughter," he said, words as calm as the surface of a lake before a storm. "You'll keep your hands to yourself." Crusher laughed, but it was brittle, crackling with surprise. He'd expected mockery, a braggart's duel. Instead, he faced a father's quiet warning. He flexed his fingers as though hearing footsteps rather than words. Then, in a gesture meant to provoke uproar, he gave her hair another rough pat, just enough to startle her tears. And that's when everything shifted. The air thickened, the ceiling fan slowed, and the hush deepened into the moment before thunder. People remembered who they were with, and who he really was. When Mick's rough fingers brushed her curls again, the hush inside Millie's cafe tightened around them like a held breath. A single spoon clinked against a saucer. The other bikers froze in mid-laugh, unsure whether to cheer their leader on or scramble away. Even the barista, Ronnie, paused with a cup halfway to his lips, eyes fixed on the small drama unfolding. Elvis sat motionless, dark glasses reflecting the dull glow of the neon sign out front. He inhaled deeply and, without rising, reached into his breast pocket. In his palm lay two objects: the battered leather wallet Mick had knocked free when he shoved Elvis's shoulder, and a single dog tag on its battered chain. He lifted the tag slowly, allowing its gentle jingle to echo in the silence. Mick took a step back. His friends looked at him questioningly. "What's he doing?" one whispered. Elvis flipped the wallet open. The fold of worn leather revealed nothing but a few paper bills and loose receipts, until his fingertips brushed a polished oval disc stamped with Sergeant E.A. Presley, U.S. Army. The chain and an old, faded snapshot tucked behind the leather spoke of faraway barracks and lonely nights. Elvis cupped the snapshot, the image of a grinning soldier he'd once known, smiling directly at the boy who placed the tag around his neck. "Sergeant Presley," Elvis said, voice low and even. "That was my father's name once. Same unit." He held the tag out, letting it dangle between them. Mick's face paled as the memory flickered in his mind. An old news story. A base commander speaking fondly of a soldier killed far from home. A boy from the front lines whose memory had faded in newspapers but lived on in that worn chain. The cafe's overhead fluorescent lights buzzed abruptly, and Mick's bravado collapsed like a house of cards in wind. He reached to snatch the chain free, but Elvis's eyes met his in that charged moment, and the world narrowed to two shapes in an empty room. Mick's lunging hand, the chain's glint, and Elvis's steady grip. With a twist so fluid it almost felt choreographed, Elvis grasped the biker's wrist and, in a single motion, guided him down until Mick was kneeling. Not with forceful fury, but with the precise control of a man who had studied balance and leverage, and understood restraint. Mick knelt, chest heaving, a flush of shame creeping into his cheeks, as he realized that any violent reaction would have been both unnecessary and futile. The other bikers exchanged looks of astonishment, their tough postures crumpling under the weight of his humiliation. A whisper passed through them. He could have broken every bone in his hand, but he spared him. Elvis didn't gloat. He didn't speak again. He simply folded the dog tag back into his palm and stood, the subtle authority of his posture reminding everyone that here was a man who carried history in his hand. He slid from his booth and crossed the aisle, every step calm, every move deliberate. Mick looked up, confusion and awe wrestling in his eyes. Before Mick could gather words, Elvis laid the chain over the biker's head. The tag slipped to Mick's chest, resting against his leather vest, two lives connected by a simple token. Mick's companions leaned in, eyes darting between their leader and the stranger who had shown mercy. Behind them, Lisa Marie reached for her father's hand. She didn't need to see his face to know he was proud, strong, and gentle all at once. Elvis placed a hand on Mick's shoulder, a gesture both forgiving and commanding respect. "Take care of this," Elvis said softly, nodding toward the chain. "It belonged to someone I admired. Now it belongs to you." Then, without looking back, Elvis turned and walked toward the counter. He paid his bill, no tip, no flourish, and gathered Lisa Marie beneath his arm. Ronnie slipped him the keys to the Cadillac in passing. Outside, the air blazed with sunlight, an echo of the tension inside. Mick rose slowly, closing his fist around the tag as though clutching a new kind of power. His voice, when it came, was almost reverent. "Thank you, sir." In that moment, the cafe returned to life. Spoons clattered against plates, conversations rumbled back, and bikes roared to life beyond the windows. But something fundamental had shifted, a lesson carved into the bones of every witness. True strength lies not in domination, but in the grace of restraint, and in the courage to honor another's legacy. As Elvis and his daughter climbed into the car and pulled away, the dog tag swung on its chain in rhythm with the passing shadows. Inside Millie's, Mick watched until the Cadillac's taillights vanished, then whispered the chain's inscription, as if reciting a sacred vow. "Sergeant Presley, I won't forget." A promise that legacy, once offered, can transform the hardest hearts. Late the next afternoon, a sleek black Cadillac eased to a stop on a quiet block, its polished chrome catching the slanting sunlight. The driver, a familiar face with a discreet earpiece, glanced at the rear-view mirror and nodded. Elvis stepped out without a stir. No entourage, no cameras, just a man in simple garments. Dark slacks, a soft cotton shirt untucked at the hem, and his signature sunglasses even as dusk approached. The house before him was modest, its white paint peeling at the corners, a narrow lawn pocked with dandelions. He reached the door and knocked softly. Inside, Jimmy's mother answered, her face lined with fatigue but alight with surprise when she recognized her visitor. Before she could speak, Elvis offered a small, respectful bow. "Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly, "I hope I'm not intruding." Her eyes widened. She set down the worn dish towel she'd been clutching. "You must be," she began, voice catching. Elvis raised a hand gently. "Just a friend, Mrs. Thompson. May I come in?" Stepping over the threshold, Elvis felt the musk of old wood and the comforting, homey scent of simmering stew. Jimmy appeared at the end of the hallway, his eyes wide as he took in this unexpected guest. When Elvis introduced himself by name, Jimmy's jaw slackened, disbelief etched on his young features. The boy's mother hastily summoned him forward, smoothing his shirt collar as though to write a dream that felt too grand to be real. Elvis followed her into the cramped living room, where a battered wooden table held a simple meal: cornbread and chicken stew, a single vase of freshly cut wildflowers from the front yard. He sat down, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Jimmy perched on the edge of a rickety chair, unsure whether to fidget or remain perfectly still. "I heard you play a bit," Elvis said, his tone gentle, "that you like music." He glanced at the battered case propped against the wall. The same guitar case Jimmy had clutched when handing over the wallet. The boy nodded quickly, his fingers twitching with longing. Mrs. Thompson brought him a bowl. "We weren't expecting guests," she murmured. Elvis shook his head. "Call this an overdue thank you for looking after my family's things," he said, "and for teaching me something about honesty." The mother blinked back tears as Jimmy watched, mesmerized. They ate together, the three of them, Elvis using a worn silver spoon that matched the mismatched set in their cupboard. He asked about school, about Jimmy's favorite songs, about how he learned to strum those first uncertain chords. The boy admitted shyly that he'd practiced every night by the dim glow of a single light bulb, teaching himself riffs from old records and humming melodies while the world outside drifted to sleep. Elvis listened, leaning forward until he recognized something familiar in Jimmy's determination. When the plates were empty, Elvis rose to retrieve something from the Cadillac. Mrs. Thompson followed him to the door, eyes wide with wonder. Jimmy lingered in the hallway, his heart thudding at the hush that settled. Moments later, Elvis returned carrying a guitar. It was not lavish, no exotic wood or gleaming inlays, but an instrument worn by years of use, its body engraved with a simple message in elegant script. "Never lose what you are, E." He set it gently in Jimmy's arms. The boy's eyes filled with astonishment as he ran calloused fingers over the inscription, tracing the letter E as if it held the secret to an unseen world. "I played this when I was about your age," Elvis told him softly. "It taught me more than any lesson I ever had. I want you to have it now." Jimmy stared, speechless, until tears blurred his vision. Elvis crouched, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't be afraid to dream big," he said. "But also remember where you come from. That makes all the difference." Jimmy strummed a tentative chord. It rang out clear and bright in the small house. His mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling freely now. Elvis rose, pressing a gentle clasp to Jimmy's other shoulder. He offered neither applause nor fanfare, only a knowing smile, as though he'd just passed on something precious to the next bearer. Before leaving, Elvis whispered to Mrs. Thompson, "If you ever need anything, food, guitar strings, an extra hand, call on me. No questions asked." She nodded, voice choked. "Thank you, Mr. Presley." He tipped his head, then stepped outside into the cooling air. The Cadillac's engine purred to life, and the car slipped away down the quiet street. Inside, Jimmy's small fingers tightened around the guitar's neck, his heart swelling with new purpose. Behind him, his mother pressed her palm to her chest, feeling both the weight of their struggles and the promise of tomorrow. In that modest home, a seed of hope had been sown, one that would grow far beyond these humble walls. By the time the final strains of Suspicious Minds faded into the roar of the crowd at the Mid-South Coliseum, Jimmy Thompson was no longer the barefoot 10-year-old who had nervously clutched a found wallet and Elliot's battered guitar in a dusty Memphis neighborhood. Under the bright lights of that vast auditorium, he stood beside Elvis Presley, center stage, hand in hand with the man who had changed the course of his young life. Earlier that evening, Jimmy's mother had guided him to his seat in the front row. She pressed the guitar into his arms, its scuffed finish now a testament to newfound hope instead of humble beginnings. When the liner notes mentioned nothing of scholarship or mentorship, she had whispered, "Just believe in yourself," and took her place among the thousands of faces in the audience. Backstage, Elvis had slipped into the side corridor clutching a folded piece of paper, the same one he had pressed into Jimmy's hand days before. An official letter from the Presley Foundation awarding Jimmy a full music scholarship to the Memphis School of Music, plus a monthly stipend for living expenses. When Jimmy looked up at him in stunned silence, all Elvis said was, "You've earned this." Now, under the glare of spotlights and the expectant hush of the crowd, Elvis raised his microphone. The audience, still buzzing with applause, settled instantly. Even the orchestra paused, all attention focused on the king of rock and roll as he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Tonight," Elvis said, "I want to share a story about a boy, Jimmy Thompson, who found something that didn't belong to him, but in returning it, he gave me something priceless: faith in the next generation." Murmurs rippled through the seats as Jimmy shifted, the guitar's wood warm against his leg. Elvis continued, This young man asked for nothing more than an honest moment. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for fame. He asked for a chance to learn. And that's why I invited him here tonight. On cue, Jimmy rose and stepped forward, hand still in Elvis's. The spotlight found him, illuminating his wide-eyed wonder. When Elvis pulled back and raised Jimmy's free hand, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Among the throng, Jimmy's mother wiped tears from her cheeks. The stage lights made her son's eyes glisten like stars. Elvis waited for the clamor to die down, then addressed Jimmy directly. "Son, play for them." Jimmy took a steadying breath and positioned his fingers on the guitar's fretboard. He chose a simple arrangement of "If I Can Dream," the song whose hopeful refrain had first stirred his heart. As the opening chords rang out, clear, pure, unadorned, the orchestra eased into the gentle string arrangement Elvis had arranged just for this moment. Jimmy's voice, tentative at first, found strength in each note. He sang of dreams that lay beyond fear, of hope rising against the night. Words that mirrored not only Elvis's own long journey, but the promise of every child who dared to believe. As he sang, Elvis stepped back into the shadows, watching the boy he'd uplifted become the man he hoped he could be. Midway through the second verse, the Colosseum fell utterly silent, save for Jimmy's measured strumming and earnest voice. In that silence, every listener felt the fragile power of one person's kindness. Even the most cynical spectator could not deny the spark of grace that had ignited from a simple act of honesty. When Jimmy finished the final chord, the hall surged with applause that seemed to shake the rafters. Jimmy dared a glance at Elvis, whose face was tilted upward, eyes glistening with tears of pride. Elvis raised both arms in tribute, and the audience followed, giving Jimmy a standing ovation that lasted nearly a minute. The last clap echoed like a promise. Jimmy set the guitar aside and embraced Elvis, who whispered in his ear, "You did it, kid." Moments later, in a private corridor behind the stage, the two stood quietly. Elvis handed Jimmy a small leather-bound journal. "Use this," he said. "Write your songs. Keep dreaming." Jimmy nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Outside, the roar of fans continued, a celebration not merely of the night's performance, but of a boy's triumph over adversity, and the bond forged between a legend and a child of hope. In the days that followed, newspapers and radio stations replayed the story of the barefoot boy who returned the king's wallet and was himself crowned a star. But more enduring than headlines was the scholarship that carried Jimmy through his education, the instruments he would master, and the confidence he would carry forward. Years later, long after Elvis's final bow and the echoes of rock and roll faded into memory, Jimmy Thompson would stand on his own stage, no longer a child, but a seasoned musician, holding that same guitar and journal. He would look out at an audience moved not just by notes, but by a legacy of compassion. And as he strummed the opening chords of "If I Can Dream," he would remember the lesson that began it all, that sometimes the richest souls do indeed come in the smallest shoes.